Your table of contents is a shot between the eyes. Every single chapter title is crushing and devastating. So we have time to talk about a small number of these topics together. I don't even have time to go over with you, well, what made you decide to, you know what? I don't know. We'll find that out from you another day. I want to jump into the topics on, for example, the phenomenon of outsourcing, which is a topic that seems to unite everybody. Republicans are against outsourcing. Democrats are against outsourcing. Everybody's against it. But you're saying outsourcing is great for workers, and it's as old as the pencil. You're going to have to justify that statement, my friend.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm glad to do it. I think our side greatly undersells free trade, which is all that outsourcing is. And to me, what free trade is that it maximizes the possibility that we get to do the work that most animates our skills. In my case, I'm a writer and an editor. But if you suddenly told me you can't outsource anymore, you have to actually manufacture the computer you type on, build the apartment you live in, grow the food that you eat, and knit the clothes that you wear, well, I would die a quick death, unemployed, emaciated, unsheltered, unfed, and with no job. But thanks to outsourcing, I get to trade what I'm best at with others who are doing what they're best at, and it gives me a life of plenty. We're all expert outsourcers because we're individuals. When we pull $5 out of our pocket, we are outsourcing our provision of news, the making of coffee, the food we eat, everything to others, and it's what makes our lives so rich. It's when you can outsource that you live a life of unrelenting drudgery.
But what about, look, I spent my life acquiring these skills, I'm a computer programmer or whatever, and now these firms can go overseas, they can go to somebody from India, whatever my skill is, all of a sudden I'm obsolete. All this effort that I put in is worth nothing. So wouldn't it be better for America if we protected these Americans against the phenomenon of outsourcing and forced these greedy companies to hire Americans and pay them a reasonable salary?
Well, that would be, I suppose that would be the equivalent. I suppose we could do that, and then let's, in the process, let's banish the computer, the ATM machine, maybe the tractor, and a couple of other labor-saving devices. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but let's face it, outsourcing is what we do all the time. It's when we get on the computer. I'm always amazed when people email me and say, what an awful person I am for wanting to send jobs overseas. And I say, well, you're typing this on a computer. Do you realize how many jobs your computer destroyed? Now, the point here is that the computer, of course, did make a lot of work redundant. So does the ability to outsource make a lot of work redundant. But that's merely the seen. The unseen are all the jobs, the much better paying jobs that outsourcing creates as a result of. Let's face it, businesses operate on profit. That's what attracts investors who create the jobs in the first place. If businesses are not seeking profits, they will quickly be bankrupt and there will be no jobs. Outsourcing is the beautiful process whereby we not only perpetuate work in the United States, but we maximize the possibility that we will get paid the most for it and that we'll get to do what we're best at.
I've often thought of it this way, that it is the equivalent materially of a situation in which products and services were just falling from heaven, or falling from heaven very cheaply or something, but in effect falling from heaven, and we indignantly rejected them. No, we don't want these free things. We want to work for them instead. Like, we know that wouldn't really make any sense, so I don't see how it could make sense here either. That's always been my shorthand way of thinking about it. Any policy that tells me to reject indignantly a free gift can't be good overall.
I love how you put it. You put it better than I do, and maybe we expand on that. One of the great lines in Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson is he makes the point that what's forgotten is that what's good for the individual must by definition be good for the economy. And so thinking of outsourcing, we as individuals were constantly outsourcing, but what if they in India created a cancer cure? And so would we say, oh, no, to your point, we're not going to accept that because that was created in India. What if they create a private jet that we can all own in Singapore? Are we going to repel that? Obviously, as individuals, we're not. And so the same outsourcing is the same way. It's benefits coming from somewhere else. The Chinese make for us the shoes, socks, and T-shirts that if we made that kind of work would impoverish us. Instead, they make it for us, and it gives us time to create Google, Intel, and Microsoft. Are we going to refuse that which enriches us so much? I think we both agree we're not going to.
John, normally on my episodes, we have more of a conversation rather than jumping from one topic to another, but because of your book covers so many topics and I want to fit so many of them in, I just can't help myself. I guess I want to close with a question on free trade, because this is an area where libertarians generally believe in it, but again, the general public is another matter. They're not entirely sure how they feel about it. Republicans and Democrats alike are not really sure how they feel about it. And it's because they believe that although they understand that it can be beneficial to exchange to get products from other countries, they want it to be fair trade. They want there to be some kind of level playing field, and they will always give you the example of China. And they'll say in China, they're using slave labor, they're using child labor. You can't expect American workers to compete with that. And they will also say that firms that are setting up shop in China are simply predatory, taking advantage of and exploiting those people when they could very, very easily pay them higher wages. So how do you sort all that out?
Oh, gosh. The way I sort it out is that every day that the Chinese get up and go to work is a day that Americans get a raise. There are so many ways to address this, but let's face it. Let's take it back to first economic principles. Let's take it back to Hazlitt. What is good for the individual is good for the economy. I want to meet the person who is made worse off when they can buy shoes more cheaply, when they can buy clothes more cheaply, when they can buy computers more cheaply. None could say with a straight face that's in fact true. So are we made better off by Chinese exports? Of course we are, by definition. Life wasn't as grand without the Chinese producing for the global economy as they've done. People like to bring up, of course, the low wage argument that they're stealing jobs from the United States. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. If you want to break it down to kind of a Keynesian stat, labor force participation has increased over the last 40 years as the Chinese have embraced capitalism. But I think the greater point here is, if in fact it were true that the Chinese were stealing our jobs, then we would see this in investment. But in fact, what creates jobs? It's investment. We know that. There are no companies and no jobs without investment first. I don't care if you're a Paul Krugman liberal or an Austrian Miesian. We all know what creates jobs in companies. Okay, well, so where does the most investment in the world go, particularly venture capital investment? It goes to New York, Boston, and most of all, San Francisco. We're talking about 3 high-wage cities. If, in fact, the Chinese were stealing investment and jobs from it, those 3 cities would be depopulated. But instead, what we find is that as China rises, America's economic prospects increase because they make low-value goods and that if we made would impoverish us, and it gives us time to create some of the most valuable companies in the world. And let me just add, I realize this is a long-winded answer, it's not just the creation of jobs at Apple and Intel. Many would say, including me, I don't rate a job at those places. But the reality is, when those companies rise up, the jobs created around them are vast. Yoga instructors, personal trainers, baristas, lawyers, investment bankers. The list is long of the jobs created by the rise of these successful companies that outsource a lot of their manufacture overseas.